Thank you, everyone. This is Frank Yako with ASMGi. Appreciate you joining us today for this webinar. It's certainly a compelling topic, ransomware trifecta, attack, security awareness, and managed detection and response. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to introduce our panelists and presenters today, Steve Racing and Peter Rebholz. And I'll let you introduce yourselves and we'll start the conversation. Thanks again for your time. If you do have any questions, please feel free to submit those through the Q&A box as well as the chat box in your Zoom panel. Thanks, and look forward to the discussion today. Steve?
Awesome. Thank you, Frank. Thanks, everybody, for sharing your time with us today. It's a great topic and certainly a very relevant one, right? Ransomware, we all know it's happening. It's happening a lot, quite honestly. So we're going to focus on that topic today and really break it into three components and just paint a little picture of the background, right? And talk about the attacks that have been going on and some things that we can do to help prevent that from happening, right? Including security awareness and managed detection and response. So I'm very excited to share this information with you today, and great to have you with us today, Peter. So joining me is Peter Rebholz from Arctic Wolf. Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Steve, and thanks to the ASMGi team for having me here. Very excited to be here. I've been in the IT sales and account management industry now for about 8 years, and I help ASMGi with really all things related to service delivery, partner enablement, things like that.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, well, certainly glad to have you here, and we're going to tap into your wisdom and expertise quite often. I mentioned a little bit, in the introduction about what we were going to focus on, but just from an event and agenda standpoint. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the attacks that have been ongoing in ransomware, and certainly everybody's aware of those most likely. But and also then we're gonna talk about security awareness and how that can prevent ransomware. Period. Right. Manage, detect, and response, and manage risk, and all of those things that come along with it. How can that be leveraged to prevent ransomware? And then we'll talk a little bit about some outcomes that we think are ideal to prevent ransomware and stop the bad guys in their tracks, right? And some of the things that we're doing together with Arctic Wolf that we think are pretty special, right? So we'll share some of that information, and it's worth mentioning, and I know Frank mentioned this, but this, our goal is for this to be interactive. If you have questions, there's a Q&A input box. Please submit your question. Some of them we may get to during the presentation. Some of them may fall after we have a Q&A section designed specifically for that point. But please, as things come up, just enter it in the box, and we'll get to it as quickly as possible. So ransomware attacks. Let's just talk a little bit about that. So the first metric that I think is really interesting for 2021, and we're definitely seeing this happen from a trend standpoint, right? But every 11 seconds a ransomware attack. It's just phenomenal if you think about it, right? That's like 7,800 and some change attacks per day, every single day, right? And these are the kind of things that we're seeing happen. So it's a very interesting metric, and certainly something that's relevant. But what I also think applies to a lot of businesses is how much does this cost them, right? So the industry believes that in 2021 we'll see the impact from ransomware alone. This is just ransomware, $20 billion. It's just mind-boggling when you think about the amount of money. $20 billion. It's 57 times as much as it was in 2015. 6 years, 57 times as much. It's just mind-boggling when you think about that. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously in my industry, we hear it nonstop. Big, small, doesn't matter the industry. It's just more and more prevalent, and as time goes on, it's probably going to get more prevalent.
Yep. So you mentioned something that I think is important for people to understand, right? The bad guys don't really care what industry you're in. It applies to everybody. Does ransomware care if you're in an industry? The answer is no, they don't. Everybody's a target for ransomware. It doesn't really matter. And the types of attacks that we'll talk about in a little bit are changing, quite honestly, so that more people are impacted directly by an attack. And I think that, the distribution across the industries, we're seeing that it doesn't really matter, quite honestly, what industry you're in. So just in really kind of wrapping up where we're at today from a ransomware standpoint, some of the things that were pretty interesting to me from a time and cost standpoint, the average amount of downtime, and I think this is important for companies to understand this, the average amount of downtime, 23 days. Just so, when you try to do a cost analysis of, if I get ransomware, it's going to cost this. If I do this, it's going to cost this, or however you do total cost analysis at your organization. If you think about that, 23 days of downtime. So what is the cost of being down for a day, and times 23? That's what it's going to cost you as a business, right? That's part of what it's going to cost you as a business. So anyway, the interesting part about this, I think, is that ransomware remediation costs globally, right? They're on the rise, obviously, right? $761,000 a year ago, $1.85 million, almost $2 million today. So that's a significant over 100% increase in the cost of a ransomware attack to a businesses. And the costs, so this is the other thing that I think is really important for people to understand. The costs are not just like you pay, for a ransom, 150 or $1.5 million, whatever, the amount ends up being. The costs are not just the hard dollars that you cost, recovery impacts, the legal ramifications, all of these things. Sometimes the most costly, reputation hit, right? So imagine if your customers say, oh my goodness, or if they're regulated from a third-party risk standpoint, this company just got breached, we got to go find another company, those kind of things. It's material. But so here's what I think is really important to understand. 54%. So from the state of ransomware perspective, 54% of companies believe that cyber attacks are too advanced for them to really do anything about themselves, right? 54%. It's unbelievable. All industries, and I think, again, this is a very critical thing for people to understand. It doesn't matter what vertical you're in. There isn't a leader. Well, there is a leader, but it doesn't matter. It applies to everybody, right? So all industries are under attack constantly, and the attack vectors are changing. So this is the other thing I thought that was really interesting, Peter, and something that we can really drill into. But RDP and, leaving the vulnerability of leaving RDP ports open, right? The bad guys were like, hey, let's run a scan of the public internet and find out who's got an RDP open, and then go buy an exploit kit. And that tells me exactly step 1, step 2, step 3, how to really accomplish this, and then do it, right? So RDP was number 1 for a pretty good amount of time, right? But now phishing attacks have really bumped that. In Q4 of last year, phishing attacks took over as number 1. But what we're seeing a lot of are software vulnerabilities being exploited, right? So custom software applications, if you have externally facing applications, clearly a problem, right? If you're like RMM, the VSA breach most recently, and SolarWinds, those kind of things, which we're going to talk a little bit about specifically, but they were exploits on software vulnerabilities. That's how the bad guys planted their payloads in the software, right? And then because they're remote monitoring and management software, because they're used by a lot of companies who have a lot of companies as customers, 1,500 customers impacted by the VSA breach. The bad guys only had to breach one company to be able to impact 1,500 companies. It's phenomenal. But we're seeing a shift in the attack vectors and how the bad guys are doing it. So what do you think, Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the compound on that is we're just seeing more sophistication in these attacks too, where they're trying to penetrate the network deeper, get into backup systems, things that you may have already put in place that was your kind of get out of jail free card, if you will, to if you were to encounter ransomware. But so as they're getting more advanced and sophisticated, they're trying to stay under the radar, undetected. and then really grab the money bag when the time is right.
Yep. Well said. Well said. No argument here. So I just wanted to reflect on a couple of the recent things that have really made headlines. And, everybody's heard about Colonial Pipeline. I think it's a very material example of what can happen when a company gets breached, right? So a lot of the talk around Colonial Pipeline is things kind of unfolded and various different things where, hey, it was the IT network, it wasn't really the OT network, right? So they're a critical infrastructure company. So if anybody doesn't know, Colonial Pipeline, they operate a pipeline that runs between Texas and the, I'll say the East Coast, right? So they provide gasoline to the East Coast. Huge impact, right? So there's an opportunity to affect a lot of people. There's no question, but certainly a lot of businesses. So what's interesting about this breach is that as things started to unveil and the forensics were done and all those things, what we learned is that the attack was the result of a single password compromise, and they didn't have two-factor authentication in place, right? So I think it's huge. It's a huge lesson learned, right? But I'll tell you one thing, Peter, that's very interesting. I sat on a panel recently that had some cyber insurance people on it. And we were talking about cyber insurance in general, right? But the question was, is there anything that is causing you to deny a company a policy? And two-factor authentication is what came up. And this is why, right? This is why, an example of why that can happen and how easy it is to compromise an account. But two-factor authentication, even though I hear a lot of people say, hey, but that's exploitable, right? People can get past it. That may be true, but it's a great way to prevent attacks on the surface, and the majority of attacks are preventable, right? Just by doing two-factor onto your phone. But do you have anything to reflect on that, Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a necessary beginner step, as you said, that'll do that. And then it's really just part of the whole awareness thing where you're exploited. Your employees are one of your biggest attack vectors, and everyone's looking at protecting their network, their endpoints, and more often than not, one of the biggest areas of exploit can be the employee themselves.
Yep. Yeah. So, and then I just wanted to mention a couple things that are interesting. The Colonial Pipeline was $4.4 million ransom. So the bad guy said, how about $4.4 million, right? That's after several negotiations. And we all know that the FBI was able to retrieve some of it and all these things. $4.4 million. JBS, the meat company, right? It was also breached. And I just thought I would mention this. $11 million. That was the ransom. So we're seeing a huge escalation in ransoms. There's no question. It's a big problem. I wanted to mention some of the other things that have really occurred recently, but we all know, and again, SolarWinds has probably been it's so public, it's been the topic of conversation for for a while now. But I wanted to mention it just because the type of attack, we're seeing a shift, right? So supply chain, attacking a company like SolarWinds or Kaseya, right? The supply chain attack, if you do one attack, then you can impact multiple customers, right? And in the Kaseya scenario, basically what the bad guys are saying is, hey, look, 1,500 companies have ransomware. They can't use their data. It's all encrypted. They can't do business. Pay us $70 million. And I just want to say that again, because it's so impactful. $70 million to encrypt everybody all at once, right? Unencrypt everybody all at once. So that's the ransom that was asked for. It's just phenomenal. But we are seeing a shift in the attack vector, and I think that supply chain attacks are on the rise, right? So let's jump into the next topic, Peter. But just before we do that, I just wanted to share, as it relates to background and paying ransoms and things like this. I used to be of the belief that don't pay the ransom, right? just kind of like the FBI, right? So we all heard the FBI is adamantly opposed with negotiating with the bad guys and paying ransoms and all those things, right? So I adopted that belief, not because the FBI did, but because that, I truly believe you're going to end up on hey, these guys are going to pay the ransom list and so on and so forth. But what occurred to me over time was it's really a business decision. Sometimes it might make more sense for your business to pay the ransom. Sometimes it might not, right? And insurance companies, if they're paying the ransom anyway, why not just pay the ransom, get back in business quicker, right? So that, I get it. I get all of that, right? But I think our jobs as service providers becomes now, what if we made our job to not pay the ransom? If we made not paying the ransom the best business decision, I think that's really the approach that we want to take, right? So make not paying the ransom a better business decision than paying the ransom. This will influence ransomware across the board, right? So, well, I'll close this segment out with just three primary goals, I think, from a ransomware standpoint. Number one is prevent it. If you could do that, then number two and number three are less important, right? Just prevent the attack from happening. So we're going to help people understand how to do that. Number two is minimize the impact. So if the attack is going to happen, and if your network is going to get compromised, how do you minimize the impact of a compromise, right? So if the bad guys are already on there. As it relates to SolarWinds, they're saying for months, the dwell time was measured in months. The bad guys were on that network for a long time before they were discovered, right? And then priority number three, or say goal number three is to practice, right? Just practice. Don't let the time that you're having an incident be when you try to figure out, like, who am I going to call first? Who's going to call who, right? And those kind of things. So just anything to wrap up on the ransomware piece, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. We like to really take a holistic approach where you're both being proactive and then having a reactive and having partnerships in place that can really help you to implement these plans to mitigate any sort of response, or mitigate, I guess, any vulnerabilities or anything within your network that might be compromised.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to keep moving because we have a lot of material, but I want to talk about security awareness. And, the point that Arctic Wolf makes, which I completely agree with, security awareness is more than just training. It is not. So a lot of times people use the terms interchangeably, and it isn't. It's about, awareness is more about creating a culture around security. Training is a thing that you do, and it may help create awareness. You may leverage training to create awareness, but awareness and training are not the same thing, right? So this, visibility and coverage from an attack surface standpoint. So we've all heard about the shift in attack surfaces and all these things, but devices, network, and cloud, that pretty much sums the piece of it up that some of the other solutions that we're going to talk about and try to touch on today apply to. But awareness training and awareness in general, people, right? People. So we've heard it said thousands of times in thousands of ways, people are the weakest link in our organization. So how do we get people to understand why security is so important, right? So that we don't have to pay these bad guys $4.4 million or $70 million or that kind of thing. So what I thought was interesting is that 85% of the data breaches, historical data breaches, right, that have been reported are the result of an employee action. So again, direct implications to awareness training. And I think that's pretty important to understand. People forget. So this is the other thing. And I think intellectually, a lot of times when we think about this topic, we get it and understand it. But yet we do training like once a year, or when you hire a new employee, or those kind of things, right? So it's important to understand that people are going to forget, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But so repetition is critically important if you want something to stick and be top of mind for individuals. And I think that's a key point. 6% of employees feel adequately prepared for a cyber incident, right? 6%. that's a pretty low number, right? So that I think when you put all this together, what it basically means is, hey, look, the bad guys know this too, right? So that's why they're going after people so much. And I think that's one of the things that we'll talk about. So I just wanted to dig into some of the social engineering. We won't spend a lot of time on use cases or case studies around this, right? But these I thought were really interesting in the Toyota scenario. Like a senior executive, like this is somebody that knows better, right? This is somebody that knows better, but they were tricked into changing their bank account for a wire transfer. It cost them $37 million. I mean, that's material, right? I mean, how do you prevent something like this, Peter?
Yeah, and I mean, the Toyota example is incredibly interesting because, like I said, as these attacks get more sophisticated, it's all about knowing, and the bad actor is really all about knowing the environment that they're trying to take a hold of. So whether it's spoofing emails or compromising emails, monitoring emails, and finding that exact right time to request a transfer to make it look like, I mean, it's a senior, like you said, a senior executive. That you would think that this person wasn't dumb by any means, but it's a lot of planning and a lot of work that goes in on these bad actors' behalf to really make something like this possible.
That's right. It's mind-boggling when you think about it, but I think the other lesson learned that comes from this is that this can happen to anyone, right? To anyone, and it's important to understand that. The other thing that I thought was relevant to really touch on, COVID. We're going to talk about COVID for a long time, right? It's certainly an unprecedented scale and unprecedented event from a lot of different perspectives. But the bad guys are saying, "Hey, we're now is the time," right? So 30,000 daily attacks because of the 30,000 attacks a day. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? When you think about that, how to defend against something like that, right? But I think that this really just plays right into this whole way of thinking, right? Like this isn't going away, right? It's real and it's here to stay, and it's something that we have to find a way to manage and deal with. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things real quick before we get into the awareness, security awareness solution. But this forgetting thing, right? So there's science involved here. So the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, 80% of everything that you learn, you're going to forget, right? What do you think? What do you think about that, Peter?
I learned that yesterday and almost forgot it.
Right. Don't worry, I'll remind you.
Yeah, right.
Right. But it's true. And so this applies again to a lot of things we do in this industry. But security is certainly one of those things, right? The saying in security used to be trust but verify. Now it's don't trust anybody. But getting to that point from a trust but verify is difficult. It's very difficult because most people don't understand the capacity and magnitude of the problem. People who are in cyber, who are walking around with their phone getting alerts like nonstop, taking their laptops to meetings, not because they want to, write notes to the person next to them, but because they have to fight real battles during, all these things. But everything that you learn, you're going to forget 80% of. It's just mind-boggling. And that is why the effective awareness programs, security awareness programs, use repetition, right? I need to tell you today that this is important. I need to tell you, 30 days from today or a week from today or whatever the cadence we decide on is appropriate. But I need to tell you more than once, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want to obviously tell it in a way that's actually going to be utilized by employees. You want it to be easy to access. You don't want to have them log into a separate website or, really just have it right there, quick learning, constant reminders of what you can do to improve your security posturing.
Yep, agreed. So if we think about, this concept of it's more than just training, it isn't like just learning about security that we want to influence. It's behaviors that we want to influence. And the ideal outcome, the result, is changing the culture of our organizations. And if everybody collectively is thinking about security, then changing that culture is not out of reach, right, anymore. So first you have to provide the awareness through training and different techniques, right? And if you provide the awareness and gain awareness, that's step one, then pretty soon you'll start to influence behaviors because your beliefs change, right? And if enough people change their behavior, then that becomes the culture of the organization. And that really should be the goal of an awareness program, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's what Forrester says about this problem. Even when security teams are proactive about training, too often they focus exclusively on training and awareness and stop short of influencing longer term behavior, right? So it isn't about checking the box, right? So we hear this term all the time, checking the box, but it's not about saying, hey, I've had security training, so now you can give me access to to your sensitive data. It isn't about that as much as it is changing a behavior. And if you change enough behaviors, it becomes a culture. But you have to change a behavior of one person first, and every person an employee. But I thought that was interesting and relevant. So let's get into the how a little bit, Peter. And maybe you can talk us through this concept of micro-learning and what does it really mean?
Sure. So that's really brought in with that Ebbinghaus forgetting curve that by giving you a lot of short sessions frequently, it's going to help you to continue to build that awareness of what you should be looking out for. And honestly, I just did one of these this morning here internally. And it's, you walk into the office, you have 20 emails or 30 emails you have to respond to. But these videos, they're short. It's a regular cadence. You're expecting it. And it's giving you good information. The one this week was about working from home and what tools to, or what, I guess, practices to employ, whether you're at your home or a coffee shop. Really basic stuff, but that can go a really long way. And really by using this micro-learning approach, it's going to lead to higher participation from your employees, better retention of the information, and just overall improved behavior as you try to build that culture of security.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely think there's been an evolution of security awareness training modules, right? So I'm old enough, so I still remember when PowerPoints were used and they were like an hour long, right? No, who's got an hour? Nobody has an hour today, right? But most people, if not all people, have 3 minutes. And so I think the concept is do this routinely, regularly, often, and make it shorter, right? So that we don't lose focus and attention spans along the way. So, yeah. So here's an example, right, of a video and then a message that goes along with it, and how you do the videos and those kind of things. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But the other thing that I think is important, and phishing is the #1 attack vector these days, right? So, what I personally have noticed, and certainly the industry has noticed, it used to be when you got a phishing email, it was broken English and there was no logo and no signature block and no phone number. And, it was really easy to tell that, hey, there's something about, these emails are saying, hey, can I have your password? But, anyway, it was pretty easy to identify that it was a phishing email. Today, that is not the case, right? The bad guys have gotten really sophisticated, to your earlier comment, and the phishing emails are very important. At Toyota, it's phenomenal, but a high-level senior executive gave up a boatload of money, right? Because the bad guys crafted an email it almost doesn't seem fair, right? But we all as humans are susceptible to this, even no matter what level in the organization we're at, no matter what our educational backgrounds, we're all susceptible to this. So doing regular routine automated phishing attacks is critically important. But I wanted to talk about this because it isn't enough to just, try to trick your employees and find out who the clickers are, right? So who's going to fall for the fake email. It's important to say, hey, this is what you could have or should have looked for in this email to be able to identify that it's not valid, right? It's a trick. And so, let's do that, right? So let's not just send a phishing test email, but let's tell people, hey, you could have looked at this. And so what I really like about this is that, we're saying, hey, number one, the social engineers, the guy that put this email together, he wants you to see the employee benefits part, not the email part, right? So and again, we're all human. So our eyes go to the bold text. That's just the reality of this. So we see employee benefits. Our mind tells us, hey, this must be valid. It came from employee benefits, right? We don't even notice that it's a Gmail account and an email that we don't recognize. We don't even notice that, right? It's not fair, Peter. It's not fair that the bad guys are catching us doing these things. But we think that if you do this micro learning and you do this awareness training enough and like this, that we can help change behaviors of individuals. And that is how you create a culture. So what any comments on that?
Yeah, one thing I really just wanted to point out is, it's easier to identify some of the stuff when you're sitting in front of your computer. Like you said, you'll see the email coming from a Gmail account and a few other things, but by giving you all these different points of, hey, this is what you should be looking out for, it makes it easier to translate. When you're working on your phone, a lot of us are looking at emails and the screen is shrunk down. Maybe there's not as much information available, but by creating that awareness of, this might think twice, giving you other things to look at within an email, this is just going to help overall.
Yep. That's a great point. And I should point out that, it's not if, but when the bad guys send you an email, because we all get them constantly, right? It's not gonna, they're not gonna include all this information and highlight where the trick is, right? So it's very important to educate people about why security is so important. There's no question. I wanted to talk about the dashboard a little bit because, it's one thing to do training and awareness training or security awareness correctly, right? But the other thing that's important is to be able to have metrics around it, right? And understand those things. And so this solution, this awareness training comes with a dashboard that basically gives you all that information, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll let you know, who's falling behind, who's not participating, who's falling victim to the phishing, tests. And then, the beauty of it too is with, we have our concierge security team, which you'll hear about, but we can really help you to tailor these to industry specific things. So the videos that your employees will be getting will be tailored to their exact industry that you're in. So it's not just a broad overview. It's really pointed things that they're going to be encountering in their day-to-day jobs.
Yep. The other point I wanted to make, Peter, is that, if this is part of an overall solution that includes the MDR and the MSOC stuff that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but if it's part of that solution and, managed risk is in there too, we know where the vulnerabilities are, and we know, like where your organization might be struggling and where you're doing a great job of protecting your organization and those kind of things, right? That's critically important because then we can provide training for the areas that you're weak in, right? As an entity and report on those things as well. But it definitely helps from a managed awareness program to be able to know where your vulnerabilities are, right? And where you're vulnerable at as an organization and train on specific things. So I wanted to point out that Gartner, Gartner has said that by 2023, organizations that do this, right, they implement specific and measurable awareness programs, security awareness programs, will experience 75% fewer account takeovers. That's a material amount. What do you think about that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just so important, the attack surface of employees themselves and implementing these programs to keep you up to date on what the new vectors of attack might be, and doing it constantly, just burying it in your head, just so important to preventing any a future attack potential.
Yep, agreed. So let's talk about this managed detection and response a little bit, because I think, this is where Arctic Wolf really, cut your teeth, right? And so, but it's such a critical, important part to preventing ransomware from happening, and all of those goals we talked about, and we'll go through this a little bit. But MDR to me is this is the 24/7 eyes on glass part, and it's such a critical thing. But I want to talk about it in the context of how ASMGi and Arctic Wolf work together, right? So we call our program One Team, MDR MSOC Plus, and the premier. I'm not going to get into the semantics of the difference between, we have a Plus program, a Premier program, and a Platinum program. We're going to talk about Plus and Premier a little bit today, but Premier is really just Plus with security awareness training added to it, right? So that's but the MDR MSOC Plus program includes all of the stuff that Arctic Wolf is really, really good at. And then there are some things that we add to that program that we see as a huge need in the marketplace. And I think it's important to do that. So I like this slide, Peter, because and this came from Arctic Wolf. I wish I could take credit for this idea, but the active, reactive, and proactive, the components that make up an MDR MSOC Plus program can be broken into pieces, parts. And I think this is a brilliant way to do that. But when we think about MDR, there's already a compromise of your network, right? So now it's about detecting it. It's a reactive thing, right? So something has already happened. How do you react to that in a way that prevents more from happening, right? And in a lot of cases, prevent bad things from happening at all, right? Because just because somebody compromised your network, that's bad. Don't get me wrong. But if you can stop it before there is an impact to your business, that's a very good thing, right? So the proactive part is basically managing the vulnerabilities and doing those kind of things. And so there are a lot of components that we'll talk about that. And then the managed SOC piece, this is active, right? It's hands on the keyboard. It's the stuff that you have to do operationally every single day. So I think it's a great perspective to start with in this program. And I want to go back to this, three goals of fighting ransomware are really three outcomes of this program, right? Prevent ransomware attacks. Well, how do we do that anyway? How do we do that? I can say with certainty that we're going to do that because 99% of ransomware attacks are on known vulnerabilities. This RDP led the pack from an attacks vector standpoint for several years, right? And now phishing has taken over, but people are still exploiting RDP, believe it or not. It isn't like we don't know that this is a problem, that the vulnerability exists, right? But somebody has to patch it. Somebody has to fix the problem, right? So doing a full-blown vulnerability management program, which includes identifying the vulnerabilities. First, you have to know about them, but then you have to fix them. And then part of it, a big part of it, is being able to pull all that data together and report on it, right? That you're actually fixing problems. And boards and C-suites, they want to know these things, right? They want to know that, hey, I'm spending money on security. What kind of returns am I getting? This is one way to show it. The other way to prevent attacks from happening is security awareness, right? If you educate your people and change their behaviors and develop a culture by changing everybody's behavior, you are going to prevent ransomware from happening. No question about it. goal number 2 or outcome number 2 with this program is minimizing the impact, right? So this is the MDR piece. If you're compromised or you're attacked and bad guys are on your network, how do you minimize the impact? Well, one way is early detection. The average time that an intruder is on your network, 206 days. That's mind-boggling to me, right? Like, Peter, the one thought I had is, like, even I could figure out how to do harm in 200 days. If I had 200 days to figure that out, I'd be like, hey, I'd be telling my kids, how do I, hurt these people enough so they pay me the ransom so we could. Anyway, you get it. Early detection is a key part. But the other element that I think is about minimizing impact is containment and automating containment. And so we have mechanisms together with Arctic Wolf to be able to say, like, if I click on a link on my laptop, then isolate my laptop from the network, right? This is what CISA and the US government and all of the cyber organizations are recommending, right? One of the first things to do if you recognize that you're infected is disconnect yourself from the network, right? We have a mechanism for automating that process and preventing that lateral movement and spreading of an infection and those kind of things. So minimize the impact. And then the third outcome, which I think is relevant for and important, is practice. So we do the incident response as part of this program, but having a cyber incident response plan is critical. Some people have one. It's got a lot of dust on it, right? They don't use it regularly. Some people do, some people don't. Some people have one, some people don't. I think it's very important to have an accurate written document that says, here's the team that's going to decide when we call the insurance company, when we call the lawyers and things. Don't wait until an incident happens to try to figure out all those things, right? Have a plan. And then the other key thing is do a tabletop exercise so that you can practice it and rehearse it. And this is part of that changing behaviors, right? It's a lot like the security awareness, practice. Just make sure that you're doing those things. So anything that you would add from an outcome standpoint or to this?
Yeah, really. The only thing I wanted to just kind of paint an example of where Arctic Wolf steps in. So, a good case study was this past Christmas. We had a customer that was detected at 2:07 a.m. in the morning that our systems picked up that their email had been compromised and was trying to be logged in from Nigeria or Iran or a foreign country by 2:08 a.m. So 1 minute later, we had tickets off to our partners, so like ASMGi, for example. And within 30 minutes from there, since we have the 24/7 coverage, that endpoint, that computer was logged out of all of everything they were logged into. The endpoint's taken off the network. So, it's not giving the bad actors really a chance to infiltrate your organization further.
Yep. That's a great example. And I have a lot of similar stories, Peter, and we, sometime we'll get together and share some of those. And I'd like to share them with the audience as well. We're not going to have time to do that today, but it's a key element, this early detection and taking action. So I think that's important to understand too. Actionable information. When Arctic Wolf detects a compromise, it's minutes, literally. And a lot of times 1 minute, right? But it's within minutes, literally. But from an incident response standpoint, you have to do something with that information. That's so taking immediate action is critically important. And, if you have a pen and a paper, write this down, do it, take action immediately, because every second that you wait to take action gives the bad guys an opportunity to inflict pain or harm on your enterprise, right? So we have countless examples of the same thing, right? Where, there's an indicator of compromise, it's escalated immediately, detected within minutes, and in less than an hour, in most cases, we have fully remediated the incident. But so far, knock on wood, so far so good. We've been able to prevent. So if you make, this is the other thing, where risk equals likelihood times impact, right? So when you prevent ransomware, you're usually making the likelihood of an incident, or decreasing that or making it zero, right? Because it's multiplicative. If you make that zero, risk is zero, right? But priority number 2 is, or outcome number 2 is about influencing the impact number and making it smaller, right? How do you minimize the impact to an event? The likelihood is already pretty high because they're on your network, right? But how do you decrease the impact that they can have? Early detection is critically important. So being able to do that and being able to contain the event is critically important as well. So I want to just go through some of the program stuff around MDR, MSOC, and then we'll get to some of the questions that have been coming in. But I wanted to tie this back to that slide that I showed that had proactive and reactive and active on it, because the outcomes that this program achieves for companies, outcome number 1 is the proactive piece, right? This is how you influence the likelihood of a vulnerability being exploited, or an event or an incident from happening. Item number 2 is reactive in nature, right? How do you minimize the impact? And item number 3 is the active component. And there were a lot of other active components, trust me, but this one I thought was beneficial to include as an outcome, because it's so important to practice. But it is a very active component because it's part of the things that you have to do. So what is MDR, MSOC Plus, and Premier? So I wanted to talk through this a little bit. Anyway, if you take security awareness out, it's MDR, MSOC Plus. If you put security awareness in, it's MDR, MSOC Premier, right? So that's the difference between the 2 packages. But I wanted to show this because I think it's material to understand that when you take the things that the blue items that are listed are things that Arctic Wolf does, and we do it together with Arctic Wolf, but we're leveraging Arctic Wolf SOCs. There's no question, right? Your team is very, very good at identifying indicators of compromise and this early detection, this concept of early detection. And that's why a lot of times I frame MDR up as 24/7 eyes on glass. Somebody is watching all the time. And if a bad guy is there, we're going to know about it. And we're going to say something about it, put it in a ticket and escalate it, right? Whether it's directly to the company or through ASMGi or what have you. But that act of escalating happens immediately, within minutes, right? Continuously managing the detection and response process, continuously managing the risk process. So again, the Arctic Wolf portal for managed risk, the managed risk segment, identifies all the vulnerabilities and organizes them and prioritizes them and those kind of things. But it's critical from a vulnerability management standpoint that you also fix them, right? Remediate them. So that's part of this program as well. Continuously managing cloud. So I see this all the time, Peter, that people solve part of the problem, but not all of the problem. What if you have resources or workloads running in the cloud, right? If you're not monitoring the cloud, you're not really monitoring the environment, right? So you talk about weak links being exploited. Yeah, well, they're going to be, and the cloud is a big part of that, right? So what I like about the Arctic Wolf solution is how comprehensive it is. We're monitoring everything and looking at everything, all of those resources, right? So the cyber incident response we talked a little bit about on the last slide, but do it, practice. But include the forensics. We're bundling all of this into the package, including the forensics and those kind of things, and also a tabletop exercise. So how do we prevent malware from happening? Well, eliminate the attack surface, right? We make the likelihood zero by eliminating the attack surface. We remediate the vulnerability. So Arctic Wolf will identify them. ASMGi will fix that problem. We'll actually do the work for you. That's it's important. It's critically important. Prevent. How else do we prevent it? By catching the intruders quickly. Most of the time, we catch the intruders so quickly that we're able to act and take appropriate action before something bad happens, before there is any impact, right? So we minimize impact all the way down to zero in most cases. How do we minimize the impact? Well, by isolating a system, right? So we're able to, automatically contain systems. That's critically important. So, and then the incident response stuff is increasing the maturity of the program. So the other thing, if we add security awareness that we do, is building a culture of security, right? This will prevent attacks from happening. If your people know not to click on a link from UPS, then they won't. That is a fact, and that is what all of the data suggests, right? That they have to know not to click, and they have to understand why it's so important, and know what to look for, and know all those things. So I wanted to go through that program standpoint. I got a few slides, but I'm not going to go through the architectures. But the reason I included these, I think it's important for people to know that we're looking at everything, right? So MDR is one piece of the program. We're looking at all facets of the architecture. From a security operations, the active component, where's the telemetry or their data coming from that we're looking at? How are we identifying indicators of compromise and those things? It's important to understand this. Alert fatigue is very real, and 165 million observations per week for a smaller company, 450 employees, right? So this is the kind of data when people say, hey, yeah, we're reviewing the logs, 165 million data points. I don't think so. No, people are not doing those things, right? They're not looking at 165 million. Arctic Wolf is looking at them, and I think it's important to understand that. So, and again, just from an architecture standpoint, I'm not going to go into the weeds on this, but I wanted to include it because it does demonstrate how comprehensive the solution is. And, from a vulnerability management standpoint, internal, external, cloud endpoints, we're looking at all of this stuff, right? We're looking at inside your network and outside of your network. So it's really important to understand that. So the other thing that I wanted to share before we move into the Q&A piece real quick, Gartner put a maturity model together. These are the things that should be included in a SOC analytics, I'll say tooling solution, right? Or a solution. We can get people 0 to 60, right? Do this MDR MSOC service, and your maturity, all of these things are included, right? Except for the EDR piece, the endpoint detection and response, but we'll leverage that data. We'll take the data from them, we'll make them better, and we'll be better as a result of that. But, and this is the reason it's not a 5 right out of the gate, but we'll fit in that 4 to 5 bucket because we're doing all of these things. And I think it's important to understand that. The key points I'm not going to touch on. The key takeaways, I'll say the most important thing to understand is, change the culture of your organization, right? And do that with security awareness training. And, first it's awareness, then that's going to change behaviors if you use repetition, and ultimately your goal would be to change the culture of your organization. And I think that's critically important. And so I tell all prospects and customers this, we see a lot of people, and we could spend a whole discussion point on this, but if you're going to do something in security that's going to have an impact on your organization, do this program. And it's so important, but I am certain that we can prevent ransomware from happening. So please don't end up on the headlines, folks. And anything to add to that program before I get to the Q&A, Peter?
No, I don't think so. I think it's so important, and there's a lot of tools in place, and that's really a differentiator of Arctic Wolf is if you've already done some of these investments, Arctic Wolf is built to really act as a layer on top of that and take all that information that you're already getting. So you don't have to rip and replace or do anything like that. It's a seamless transition.
Yep. That's a great point. I appreciate you mentioning that out. Leverage the investments that you've already made, right? But if there is an opportunity for cost avoidance or cost elimination, by all means, right? So we want to improve your security posture and lower your risk and save you money at the same time, right? So we want security, posture to go up We want costs to go down. And that's really what the nature of this program is all about. I wanted to mention a promotion that we're doing real quick before we get into the Q&A. If anybody on the call is interested, please, do a follow-up call. We'll send you a Yeti mug. These things are awesome, by the way. I use one at home, and it's just amazing. But let's talk through your situation and figure out if there's a way that we can help you prevent ransomware. And I think it's a great program, and you'll get a Yeti mug. So if you're interested in doing that, just, I think there's a link shown on this slide. Go to asmgi.com/Yeti, www.asmgi.com/Yeti, or just enter into the QA box. Just enter in there that you're interested, and we'll reach out to you and follow up on that. So so here we are at the Q&A piece, and I want to go through a couple of questions, Peter, that we've gotten as a result of this. And I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'll try to be quick. Let's see. Could you have prevented the recent occurrences of ransomware you referenced earlier? So I think we referenced the Colonial Pipeline event and the SolarWinds and Kaseya events. What do you think, Peter? Could we have prevented that with the solution?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if not prevent, you definitely could have minimized the impact. Mm-hmm. If there was, it's something that we would have picked up on very quickly and contained that to the local environment and not let it get as far as it did. Yeah. And, Colonial Pipeline, it was an account compromise, quite honestly, right? Somebody got credentials because they breached. There was no multi-factor authentication, and they breached it that way. I think it's key to understand that we wouldn't have prevented that from happening in this case, but we would have detected it. So I think we would have prevented the impact, but not the compromise, right? But early detection and the opportunity to automate containment and do those things, there's a very high chance that we would have driven the impact to zero, right? By detecting this intrusion in minutes. So I think it's important to understand that. SolarWinds, what about SolarWinds and Kaseya, their software supply chain attacks? Yeah, I mean, we certainly would have, detected the intrusions or the indicators of compromise that were there. Even with some of our R&D, we were not too far behind the ball on that as well. So also, yeah, we prevented a lot of damage really just by detecting that. And it was on the Friday before the 4th of July, time when everyone's already taken out their long weekends, and it hit, my inbox was blowing up at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. So we detected and got bulletins out right away to all of our partners who were affected and who we noticed these indicators of compromise within their environment.
Yep. So yeah, what I'll add to is that's a great response, Peter. And I think early detection is key in these instances. But I think we could have prevented the Kaseya breach. So there's been a little bit of information released. It's not finalized yet, so I'm sure we're gonna hear more about this. But SQL injection, was used as a mechanism to basically compromise the software lifecycle of Kaseya and implant this payload, if you will, right? So Arctic Wolf, so just for the audience, I think it's important for people to understand that Arctic Wolf isn't about software security per se, right? It's about identifying those events that happen in our environments and tripping indicators of compromise and those kind of things. And so, but a known vulnerability is on an external application, right? These kind of things are identified and escalated, and this is part of the managed risk solution. So we'll know about the vulnerabilities, and then if the organization has to fix them or it's a choice at that point, right? You either do it in-house, you outsource it, right, to ASMGi, or you don't do it at all, right? And say, I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. So, but first you have to know about it. And I think that's critical. So we'll know about vulnerabilities. We'll fix vulnerabilities as part of this program. So there's a very good chance that we could prevent it from occurring. But the second point that I'll make is that even if we don't prevent the intrusion from occurring, or in this case, installation of the payload and all of those other things, all of the individual customers that use Kaseya that are Arctic Wolf customers are notified, right? And it's critical, right? So being able to shut that VSA server down and do those kind of things, I think, is important, and that's preventing damage from happening. It results from early detection and from containment, and I think both of those things for Arctic Wolf customers were likely to happen, right? So that's important to understand. So here's another question. We already have a solution for awareness training and official emails. Why should we switch to this solution?
Well, simply because, I mean, in my opinion, it's fully managed for you. It takes, there's a lot of work that goes into not only security awareness, but in terms of these reactive and proactive approaches we've talked about, there's so much work that goes into it that this is why security administrators are falling behind the ball. They're having to go through, and maybe they have a library of content, but they have to go through and actually curate that and figure out what to send, when to send it, who's following up on it, who's clicking links, who's doing all these things. That it takes a lot of time, and they have other responsibilities on their plate at the same time. So, really, when you combine that with MDR and managed risk, we're going to know where the vulnerabilities are, and then you can tailor the security awareness accordingly to your company, your vertical, really everything that it's going to help you improve your security posture.
Yep. Great points. I think you hit the key points. It's a fully managed solution. And I think it's important that people understand that, right? If you buy a piece of technology, we have a saying at ASMGi that a total solution is the program plus the technology plus the operations, right? If you buy a piece of technology, that's only one pillar of the total solution, right? You still have to do it. Somebody's got to do it tomorrow. Somebody's got to do it the next day. And, bringing a fully managed solution to the table is a key part of that, for sure. And then also, I think that it's relevant that you mentioned, if you combine this with the other Arctic Wolf solutions and ASMGi solution, this MDR MSOC Plus program, if you combine security awareness training with those things, we already know where your vulnerabilities are. We already know where your organization is weak. So we can tailor the awareness training specific to those key areas. And I think that's important. So we're over on time, Peter. I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this. And thank Arctic Wolf, and congratulate you. A lot of recent good PR for Arctic Wolf, and I know that things are really going well over there. But really appreciate you being a part of this webinar and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. It was a great time. Hopefully everyone learned something.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Please let us know, by the way, if you have follow-up questions or anything that we can help you understand or accomplish. Please feel free to ask. Thanks. See ya.